A disturbing trend unfolding in Zimbabwe where women, especially journalists, politicians, and activists are being bullied into silence by a massive wave of online abuse. Now, the Human Rights Commission is sounding the alarm because this is not just mean comments, it's coordinated hate speech and threats of sexual violence that are causing women to self-censor or even leave social media entirely. Even though there are laws meant to protect them, the authorities are not effectively enforcing them, leaving these women to fend for themselves against the mob. How much of this harassment is being blamed on a group known as the Varakashi, essentially pro-government trolls acting like digital stormtroopers? How they use anonymous accounts to swarm female critics of the ruling party with lies, misogynistic slurs, and also terrifying threats. The goal is brutal but effective, and that is to make the online world so hostile for these women that they're forced to quit politics and activism just to protect their peace and safety. Now, for this segment of the conversation, I'm joined by Linda Masarira. She's President, Labour Economist and African Democrats lead, and also Ronika Mubirire, Executive Director at Zimbabwe Women's Bureau, who will be joining us later. But for now, we just have Linda. Thank you so much for staying with us, Linda.
You're welcome. Thank you also for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. Now, let's start with the numbers. A 2025 UNESCO and MISA report found that 63% of women journalists in Zimbabwe have experienced technology-facilitated gender-based violence. You know, the Mthonjeni Women's Forum puts that number at 75% for women in general. So when 3 out of 4 women are being attacked online, can you honestly say that, you know, the Zimbabwean government is protecting them?
Honestly, the Zimbabwean government is not protecting women in Zimbabwe because technology-facilitated gender-based violence is now the fastest growing forms of violence against women and girls in Zimbabwe. I have not been spared, and I just wanted to put a correction when you said that it's mainly the Varakashi who do that. I was trolled, I was body shamed, I was told all sorts and insults from Triple C trolls, those who were supporting Chamisa. What happens here in Zimbabwe is you're supposed to think in a particular political frame. And the moment you do not think aligned to a certain political grouping, you naturally become the enemy. You become a target of all sorts. So digital platforms are no longer just communication spaces. They are now war zones. They've become battlefields for women where they are attacked, they are silenced, and their opinions should not be heard as long as they are not aligning to a certain political grouping. It is unfortunate that our government has not done enough to ensure that the cyber laws that were actually enacted about 2 years ago are actually implemented in their totality. That is one of the biggest struggles that we are having in Zimbabwe right now. So you also look at other issues where the police itself, because I'll give an example. I've to report the cyberbullying that happens online. But you'll find that the police themselves have not been equipped. They've not been trained. They do not know how to deal with these cyber laws. So we actually have a gap that is going on. And then we've got a very active ICT ministry, which is unfortunately not looking into some of these issues, which I think that they're supposed to be looking at them and ensuring that online spaces become safe for women to use. Some people already lost their lives due to cyberbullying, due to body shaming, due to deep fakes that are created against them just to silence them. So I really feel like our government has not done enough, and they have to strengthen the cyber crime laws to explicitly cover technology-facilitated gender-based violence, which is now rife in Zimbabwe. I think it is also important for our government to establish a national digital safety task force involving the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of ICT, the Ministry of Education, and all women's rights stakeholders.
All right, Linda, you would actually have to speak more on that. But then, before then, I'm being told that we're joined by Melody Gwangwara. Okay. All right, so back to you, Linda. The Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, a constitutional body, issued a statement this week calling this abuse one of the fastest growing forms of violence. And we're seeing a specific pattern here. It's not just random trolls, it is targeted. So why are the loudest online attacks almost exclusively directed at women who challenge the government? Women like journalists, journalists like Faith Zaba, who was arrested in July 2025, or even opposition figures like Fadzai Mahere.
I think you're also doing a great injustice if you do not include me on that list.
Okay, and you as well. Apologies.
Also showed that I am the most trolled politician in this country.
Apologies, and
so
you yourself.
What basically happens in Zimbabwe is, like I highlighted earlier on, is that if you're not supporting a certain political grouping, you naturally become a target. And the same goes for opposition. The moment you're not supporting a particular opposition party, you become a target, especially the main opposition, the one that was formerly led by Nelson Chamisa. They've got very toxic people who drag your name in the mud so that you become less credible and that people do not listen to you at the end of the day. So what we're basically seeing here is a silencing of women's voices. We should not also forget that Zimbabwe is a patriarchally dominant country with high levels of misogyny. Women are treated as second-class citizens in my country, unfortunately, and we have to work 10 times as much for us to get recognition for the work that we'll be doing, because men will say we do not want to be led by women and they do not want to hear our opinions, but they cannot silence us, because at the end of the day, there is no democracy without women, and we are supposed to be heard, and we'll continue fighting until they hear us and until they listen to our opinions and what we have to say, because we are equal stakeholders in the governance of this country.
All right, now, Linda, you did say that Zimbabwe has high rates of misogyny. Now, let's get specific, because there are allegations that high-ranking officials, including presidential spokesman George Charamba, run anonymous accounts that spew misogynistic abuse. So if the president's own mouthpiece is accused of being a troll, how can any woman expect the police to even take her report seriously?
I think one of the other things that are very challenging in our political economy is we also have a lot of propaganda. And at times you don't get to know whether what people are alleging is true or not, because the presidential spokesperson himself has refuted the claims that he actually runs numerous accounts, because he has said he only has one account that is not in his name that he uses. So trying to balance whether what the public opinion is saying is true and what he is saying, you definitely get confused at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, I think what is important is to ensure that the cyber laws of this country are strengthened, they protect women, and that women can also come back to social media and use it for their professional work, whether they're journalists, they're activists, they're politicians, without fear or favor. Because most women have now gone into their cocoons. They're afraid of going online. One billionaire's wife, Titi Masiwa, actually had to close her ex account after being insulted left, right, and center. And I mean, that is not proper.
All right, now let's talk about the Cyber and Data Protection Act, which was passed, to much fanfare. But, it in practice, it seems to be a weapon and not a shield. So tell us, why is this law used to arrest journalists for publishing falsehoods, yet we have seen zero records of it being used to prosecute the men that are sending death threats to female MPs?
I think one of the biggest challenges I spoke of earlier on is a lack of knowledge on how the cyber laws operate. And there's also a conflation of the state and ZANU-PF as a political party. So at the end of the day, when our security sector just gets instructions from a political party, sometimes they're forced to act on that, and then they lose their professionalism. I can't really speak on why the Ministry of Justice is not taking action against arbitrary arrests of journalists, because they have got a mandate and an obligation to ensure that they feed the people of Zimbabwe with accurate information. And when that accurate information is actually fed, it becomes criminal. So there's an oxymoron, there's a gap, there's an imbalance where media rights and media freedoms are being undermined. And I know a lot of media groups in Zimbabwe are really trying their best to engage with the Ministry of Information and the Ministry of Justice to see how they can work together to ensure that the rights to freedom are actually upheld and not violated as stipulated in our Constitution.
Okay. Now, Linda, the government has actually signed the high-level political compacts to end gender-based violence. But in July 2025, you talked about, Faith Zaba, who was detained for a satirical article. How do you square a commitment to women's safety with the arrest of a prominent female editor, for simply doing her job? And I also want to quote a young female activist who actually told researchers, and I quote, I am waiting to rape you, was the message she received after criticizing a particular policy. And you talked about her deleting, I don't know if she's the same person you're talking about, but she deleted her account and she went silent. We often talk about politics being a dirty game, but this has to be very different.
I think one of the other things, like I said earlier on, is that we do not have a comprehensive national framework to address digital-based violence. And up to until we have that, patriarchal attitudes will continue to happen against outspoken women. That protection does not exist. And we actually have a mandate as the women who are affected to find each other and push for that comprehensive framework to be in place, and that the law should take its course without looking at who is the particular person who is actually involved in technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Because the moment we want to protect men in high offices who are using their power to abuse women online, then the law loses its value and its essence. So there's also the issue to do with digital literacy and safety tools. For example, I have decided to use the block button on anyone who wants to body shame me, wants to insult me, wants to call me names, because I also deserve my sanity and my dignity.
Absolutely.
But we do not have to go to those lengths.
All right. Now, I'm being told that Melody Gwangwara has joined. She's Programs Manager, Zimbabwe Women's Bureau. Melody, thank you for joining us. We just have a few more minutes to wrap up. But I'm sure you heard, what we're discussing and what Linda has had to say. Let's have your thoughts. And the last question I had asked was about the government signing the high-level political compact to end gender-based violence, But then, we've seen so many cases, especially that in July 2025, where Faith Zaba was detained for a satirical article. So we've asked questions, especially about the sexualization of political violence and why the response of a woman's political argument is so often, comments about her body. Even Linda has said she has been body shamed, so many times.
Thank you for having me. I would want to echo the same sentiments like what Linda has highlighted. Technology facilitated gender-based violence has been affecting a lot of activists and political candidates, and some of them have even dropped from participating in politics due to body shaming and even slut shaming. People use social media for smear campaigns to make sure that women lose confidence, and it also affects the community that is supposed to be represented by women, because their opinion is not heard. Every woman who wants to dominate the public space is then being attacked on social media, through emails, being trolled, which affects the development of the country, because we have quite a number of intelligent women out there who have their opinions to share and their expertise in different fields, but they are now scared of sharing their opinions online, being scared that someone is going to troll me or is going to cyberbully me. So I agree with Linda that we have really a cyber protection act that is in place, but it doesn't holistically address all the forms of violence that women are facing at the moment. And it's having a really rampant impact on the participation of women in terms of economics, leadership, as well as other sectors.
All right, now still on you, Melody, just before we wrap, the United Nations and Amnesty International have actually both flagged this issue. Now, do you think that, with them flagging it, that the government will commit now, to a public independent audit, of these, especially the Varakashi accounts, to determine if state resources are paying for harassment of women online?
I believe governments can adopt and ratify. There's the policies, there's instruments that come from UN, but what lacks is implementation. Because even if it's raised and nothing is then done in principle, it means we are not doing anything. So we really need to amplify our voices to make sure that we enforce these pronouncements that are being amplified by Transparency International as well as UN, because I've seen governments ratifying a lot of treaties, of legal frameworks, but what is lacking is implementation and enforcement, and no one is being held to account. Some of the cases are just, they don't get to see the justice. So that's my take on that one.
All right. Sadly, I wish we had more time to speak on this because even at the moment, we're actually in the middle of the 16 days of activism, and we know that words are cheap. So we hope that the government takes concrete action and not just promise, not just strategy or a strategy document, but one action that the government can take to shut down these troll farms. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining and speaking on this. Linda Masarira, President, Labour Economists and African Democrats, and also Melody Gwangwara, Programs Manager, Zimbabwe Women's Bureau. Thank you.